Every day, thousands of Comcast engineers and technologists, like Kunle, put people at the heart of everything they create.
In the average household, there are dozens of connected devices. Here in the Comcast family, we're building an integrated in-home Wi-Fi solution for millions of families like my own. It brings people together in meaningful ways.
Kunle and his team are building a Wi-Fi experience that connects 1 billion devices every year. Learn more about how Comcast is redefining the future of connectivity at comcastcorporation.com/Wi-Fi.
The spirit of innovation is deeply ingrained in America, and Google is helping Americans innovate in ways both big and small. Central Texas Regional Mobility Authority is using Google AI to create smarter tolling systems and improve traffic flow for Texans. This is a new era of American innovation. Find out more at g.co/American Innovation.
So, Jim, it's been 100 days of President Trump again. How you doing?
I can't wait for another 100 days.
Jim Newell covers Washington for Slate. I think of this first 100 days as incredibly personal. A lot of what's happening is happening at the executive level, the executive branch. You know what I mean? It's about Trump. It's about the people at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Not so much other folks.
He just wants to be the big boss who gets to press the buttons on any possible thing that comes. You know, like he could try to do tariffs through Congress, but he just likes being able to do it unilaterally.
Yeah, I mean, I was noticing there's only been 5 bills signed into law since Trump took office. Is that unusual?
Yeah, that's pretty bad. And he doesn't really care. I don't think he doesn't, it's not like he cares, like, oh, I haven't signed enough bills.
That's not how he measures his success.
Yeah, he wants to just talk about, what little orders he signed every day.
So what happens now? That's the question Jim's been pondering recently. His specialty is covering Congress. And this is the point in a new administration when attention is supposed to shift toward Capitol Hill, because the president is attempting to pass his legislative agenda, changes that are going to last. Trump is, of course, doing this in a very Trumpian way.
I mean, what they're basically trying to do now is trying to pass something that naturally would be broken down into like a dozen bills. Most of Trump's legislative agenda, they're trying to do it all through what they're calling one big, beautiful bill.
That's like literally its name now. I feel like people keep just calling it one big, beautiful bill.
Yeah, or OBBB.
OBB.
It's just that's what we've all decided to call it.
It seems ambitious to try to stuff what would normally be like 12 different bills into one giant bill. Yeah,
this is going to be the biggest moment for Congress the next few months as they try to get as much done in this one vehicle as they can.
It's your big moment, Jim.
It's our big moment.
Today on the show, why the president's next 100 days might be the ones that really matter. I'm Mary Harris. You're listening to What Next? Stick around.
This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Fiscally responsible, financial geniuses, monetary magicians. These are things people say about drivers who switch their car insurance to Progressive and save hundreds. Because Progressive offers discounts for paying in full, owning a home, and more. Plus, you can count on their great customer service to help you when you need it, so your dollar goes a long way. Visit Progressive.com to see if you could save on car insurance. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states and situations.
This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. You chose to hit play on this podcast today. Smart choice. Progressive loves to help people make smart choices. That's why they offer a tool called Auto Quote Explorer that allows you to compare your Progressive car insurance quote with rates from other companies. So you save time on the research and can enjoy savings when you choose the best rate for you. Give it a try after this episode at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Not available in all states or situations. Prices vary based on how you buy. Okay, so what is in the big, beautiful bill that Trump is so keen on passing here?
Generally, what we're looking at is they want to renew all of the Trump tax cuts from 2017, which are expiring, the individual tax cuts. They want to boost defense spending by $100 to $150 billion a year, which is...
It's always a fan favorite in Congress.
Yeah. And they want to spend a couple $100 billion on border security and immigration enforcement to get more resources for that. Those are the kind of the goodies that they want.
But at the same time, they want to reduce a whole lot of spending, right?
Right. Yeah. So in the House, they're required under their framework that they passed to cut $1.5 trillion in spending over 10 years. They're hoping to get it closer to $2 trillion. So where they're looking there, they're looking at food stamps, they're looking at student loans, and the biggest pot of money they're looking at is Medicaid. They haven't as yet released kind of the text for how they're going to go about doing that, but we're starting to get a clear picture of how specifically they're going to meet those big targets.
Okay, I just want to say out loud, this just seems like a lot of things to smush together. Taxes, immigration, they even want to throw the debt ceiling in there too, right?
Yes, which I think we should all be thankful for. Just get it out of the way. Yeah, so they want to do like a $5 trillion debt ceiling increase, which would take it off the table for a pretty long time. Yeah, so I like in every category I mentioned, you could have a months-long debate about each one as a major piece of legislation. So it's almost like they're bringing Trumpism to Congress. Just throw everything at the wall, distract people. People can't look too deeply in anything. Because there's oodles of policy being made here.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of how I thought of it, too, when I saw Trump a couple months back pushing for one big, beautiful bill. I was like, actually, from a political perspective, like set aside what's in here, it makes sense for him to do all of this now when he's at his most popular and he's riding that high, just like jam it through.
Yeah, and I think it was done a little bit by necessity just because, the House has a pretty slim margin.
Just to recap, Republicans have a single-digit majority in the House of Representatives, and the Senate usually requires 60 votes to get legislation through, which means party leadership has to get creative to pass the president's agenda. It's why they're using a process called budget reconciliation. Reconciliation is supposed to be the process through which the two houses of Congress agree on federal spending.
But it's in statute that there's a cap number of hours for debate in the Senate on reconciliation bills, meaning you cannot filibuster it. There's not unlimited debate. So that is now why we've seen 3-4 presidents in a row try to move everything they can through this one chance they get a year to not have to deal with a Senate filibuster, meaning you can pass it only with on a party line basis. You don't have to worry about getting 60 votes.
Right. Like Biden did this. It seems to be just the way we get things done now in the United States. You pass this big reconciliation bill. You call it budget reconciliation. It's really just your priorities.
You win the presidency. The last many presidents have all come in with both chambers of Congress on their side. This is your one shot to do the ambitious stuff you've been working on for 4 or 8 or 50 years that you've been thinking about. This is where you kind of spend your capital.
One thing stood out to me when I was looking at the lay of the land here with this bill, which was that there are just so many disagreements around what they're going to do here. Like, for instance, instructions to House committees who are going to have to create the changes here, create the law here. They're being asked to cut like $1.5 trillion in spending. But then in the Senate, the instructions are different, right? Like they're not asked to cut anywhere near that much. So it's like, how do you reconcile that when you're really just looking at completely different instruction manuals?
Right. So they went completely different approaches with how they're going around here, even though they all ultimately want to get to roughly the same goals. In the House, you had some very noisy conservatives I don't mean that as a pejorative, but they've been demanding big structural reform to mandatory spending for a while.
These are deficit hawks, people who are really worried about that.
It's people like Chip Roy, Texas Republican. He's in front of a lot of cameras, and he's insisting, we're not going to do another $4 or $5 trillion in tax cuts unless we get spending under control. So that is why, in order to get this framework through the House originally, they had to promise people like Chip Roy and other deficit hawks that we are going to find at least $1.5 trillion in cuts over 10 years. The Senate, there wasn't that kind of pressure. I mean, there are still some pretty serious deficit hawks in the Senate, but they're kind of saying, look, we're not going to lock ourselves into any corners here. Eventually, we'll work out these differences in the House once we each get our draft through, and we'll decide kind of ultimately how deeply we want to cut.
It sounds optimistic, like each side hoping they're going to convince the other of their way of seeing things.
Well, it's a series of punts, I just don't worry. We have to figure this out now. Just move the process along. And then eventually we will get to that final moment where they resolved their differences in the House and Senate. The final bill's coming for a vote, and they'll tell everyone, vote for this or your career is over, So just keep it moving, threaten. That's kind of the process here.
Huh. And this week, the reason we're talking this week is because this is when this legislation reaches this specific point, which is it starts the markup process in the House.
Yeah.
So what does that mean for, those of us who need the Schoolhouse Rock version?
So there are 11 committees who have been given orders to find X number of savings or spend this much to, on this subject, blah, blah, blah. So what we're doing right now is all those committees are writing their segments of the bill. After that, it's all going to kind of come together, and then they'll eventually move to a vote to get the House version out. So what we've seen so far this week is some of the committees that don't really have a lot going on or a lot that's controversial within Republicans, they're moving pretty quickly. But we're seeing some feet dragging from some of the committees that have the hardest and most controversial elements here to deal with. And obviously the biggest of those would be the Energy and Commerce Committee, which is required by their instructions to find $880 billion in savings. And most of the money they oversee comes from Medicaid.
So what happens to Medicaid now? We'll get into that after a quick break. This episode is brought to you by Quince. Mother's Day is around the corner, and if you are shopping for a gift for someone who is a mom in your life, you might want to check out Quince. Over the last couple of years, I've picked up a whole bunch of stuff from Quince, everything from a duvet cover to a little cashmere sweater. And you know who's really into Quince? My mom. My mom was like, you gotta check out Quince. Maybe for Mother's Day, you should check out Quince for your mom. Just turn the tables there. What do you think? Quince has items that are priced 50 to 80% less than similar brands. By partnering directly with top factories, Quince is able to cut the cost of the middleman and pass savings on to you. So purchasing cashmere sweaters, 14-karat gold jewelry, yes, really. Italian leather bags, fragrances, all of it feels good. Thoughtful, timeless, totally her. Shop Mother's Day at Quince. Go to quince.com/whatnext for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That is QUINCE.com/whatnext to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/whatnext.
There's a good chance you're dealing with a middleman, like me, when you get your medicines. That's because PBMs and insurers are often the same company. We even own big chain pharmacies and are buying your doctor's office. We decide what medicines you can get, where you get them, and how much you pay. It's a win-win. For me.
When middlemen own it all, you lose. Visit phrma.org/middlemen to learn more. Paid for by Pharma.
You may get a little excited when you shop at Burlington.
What a low price! You see that? They have my favorite brand! It's like a whole new I'm saving so much! Yeah!
Burlington saves you up to 60% off other retailers' prices every day. Will it be the low prices or the great brands? Burlington. Deals? Brands? Wow! I told you so. Styles and selections vary by store.
So let's talk about the parts of the bill where Republicans are going to have to make these tough choices we're alluding to. I want to start with Medicaid just because I think that that's where everyone keeps focusing over the last few weeks and months, because it just seems unavoidable that there will be some kind of cuts there. Democrats say the GOP has to cut Medicaid in order to pass the bill they want. Is that true, and why? Because some Republicans are saying, no, we don't have to.
That is essentially true because the Energy and Commerce Committee has to find $880 billion in savings, and most of the money they oversee comes from Medicaid. There was actually a report from the Congressional Research Service that said like 93% of the mandatory spending that Energy and Commerce has jurisdiction over is Medicaid. They're not going to touch Medicare. They're not going to touch Social Security.
Medicare is health care for the elderly. Social Security takes care of the elderly and disabled.
Yeah. So Medicaid is the next biggest pot that they're going to go after. And we also know because like months ago, this document that they've been putting together for options of spending cuts, or options of things to put in this bill, that came out, and the biggest cost savings possible were from Medicaid. So it's unavoidable. And now I also know, because I've been up there this week, and they are actually finally getting to specifics on which Medicaid cuts they're talking about.
I want to get to that in 1 second, but I just want to linger on this, like where the cuts have to come from bit, because Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, literally held a press conference where he said, we're not cutting Medicaid. It's a lie. It is so much of a lie that Democrats had these billboards up in swing districts, vulnerable GOP districts, urging people to call their representatives and say, please don't cut Medicaid. And Mike Johnson was like, we got those billboards taken down because they are lies.
Do not believe the hype. Do not believe the lies the Democrat Party has said. We are going to preserve the programs. We're not gutting Medicaid. We're going to reduce fraud, waste, and abuse, which every single American should be applauding. The Democrats should as well, but they're not allowing themselves to do it.
So it's like he's being very explicit. This is a lie.
Yeah, I mean, he's spinning like crazy. We are going to see in the coming weeks, like exactly how they're trying to spin this. Because one thing they're talking about, and they're trying to do the same thing with food stamps, they're trying to pass more costs onto the state. One of the big options they're looking at is lowering the federal share of Medicaid payments for the Medicaid expansion population. Those are those who are covered after Obamacare.
I want to just interrupt you here because I think this is important. Like, because in the beginning, like a couple months ago, when we were talking about this big, beautiful bill, blah, 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 the conversation was really about, let's do work requirements for Medicaid.
Well, they are still going to do that too. But the problem with that was if they do more work requirements or more eligibility checks or some of these more enforcement measures, there's maybe $100 billion there. That is not nearly enough to get the money that they need. But they are still going to do that.
Huh. So tell me a little bit about this effort to pass the costs on to the states. How would that work?
So right now, under the way that Medicaid was expanded under Obamacare, where everyone who's up to 138% of the federal poverty line was eligible for it, the federal government would cover 90% of the costs for those new enrollees, and the states would only cover 10%.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Yeah. It's a more generous arrangement than traditional Medicaid, where there's this formula and the feds usually cover between 50 and 75%. So one of the big things they're talking about now, and it could save $500-600 billion, which is kind of the big chunk of change that they need, would be to either lower that 90% for the expansion enrollees or just, make it on par with traditional Medicaid. So, every covered population has the same percentage.
But can the states afford this? Because it seems to me like it sets the states up to be the fall guy here. It's like, we're going to cut Medicaid, but we're going to make it look like it's your governor's fault.
Yes, that's exactly what they're doing. If they pursue this path, but you've seen a couple of members of the committee say like, oh yeah, so we're not cutting anything. It's just, the states then decide if they want to chip in a little bit more or whatever, and then it's up to the governor. So that is kind of how Mike Johnson and others who are saying, we're not cutting Medicaid or whatever. That, they're saying, no, we're just transferring more costs to the states and then they decide. But I don't know, I'm pretty traditional. I think when you cut the amount of money that you're going to give for this program, those are Medicaid cuts.
Well, yeah, and I've also read that there are a few states where Medicaid expansion was achieved through a constitutional amendment.
Yeah.
So even if the states did want to blow things up here, they can't. And so they're really screwing those states.
Well, another big issue is there are 12 states that have these trigger laws where if the Obamacare expansion, if the Fed's share dips below 90%, then the expansion is either dead or, becomes much less generous.
Oh,
so
wow.
that is actually a reason why, as we're talking right now, middle of the week, it looks like Republicans may be moving away from this tactic on the Hill and maybe looking for another way to achieve their savings. And that would be per capita caps, where basically you tell the states, we'll give you X amount of money per person who's covered under the Obamacare expansion of Medicaid.
How does that affect the math?
Well, for the expansion population, it's less of an open-ended checkbook is the way Republicans would describe it. It's very similar structurally to block grants, where you kind of fix an amount of money that you're going to give for this program and then tell other states to work it out. If your actual costs are going to be more than what you're getting from the feds, then, you either need to innovate and find efficiencies or you need to cut services. So we're kind of getting to the same idea here, where just the feds are, the federal government is looking at shrinking its share of the cost for the Medicaid expansion. Again, I would call that a cut. Maybe they can say it's good policy or whatever, but it is a cut of what you're sending to the states.
It's not just cuts to Medicaid, right? Like Congress is talking about cuts to student loan repayment programs and federal food assistance.
Yeah, so I think food assistance, again, they're following a pretty similar playbook, and this is not getting as much attention. But, they have to find the Agriculture Committee, which oversees nutrition. They have to find $230 billion in savings. And for the first time ever, they are looking at introducing a cost share for the states. So the federal government pays 100% for nutritional assistance. They're looking at ramping it up to where the states would start covering around a quarter of that. So it's kind of a similar idea they have in mind. And again, that gets back to the question of do states have the money for this? The answer is they probably don't, and there's going to be cuts. So we'll see how this all works out in the end.
While the GOP bickers over these cuts, leadership is also trying to perform a fiscal magic trick, making billions of dollars in Trump tax cuts disappear from the federal balance sheet.
They're basically saying that since we're extending what the current policy already is, then they actually don't cost anything. Ta-da.
Ta-da.
When really, if you extend all the Trump tax cuts for another 10 years, it's going to cost $4.5 trillion. But they're just saying, just because we've gotten so used to it, it actually doesn't really cost anything. And that gives them more budget space to work with. They don't have to cut as deep to do everything they're trying to do. So there's a lot of cross currents in this bill. A lot of things interacting with each other in ways we probably don't fully understand because it's too much policy to do at once.
Right. That's definitely the feeling I'm getting, where it's like we're making a lot of decisions all at once, and the outcome could be rather chaotic.
Yeah, and it might require further study, which is why, again, the
study will be done in real life by the American people.
Yeah, it'll be a fun little experiment for the country. But, this is why it was probably ambitious to say it'll all be done by Memorial Day to begin with.
Yeah. So I'm getting the picture of a whole lot of camps here. Like you have budget hawks saying they're not into tax cuts. You have people in GOP states who are saying, hold it, we've relied on this Medicaid money and now you're thinking of slashing it. How are they going to work this out? Are there individual legislators, you're looking at them just to see if they respond in XYZ way, it'll tell us something about where this bill is headed?
Yeah, I'm looking at, I try not to use them as interchangeable, but House moderates and vulnerable members, because there does tend to be a lot of overlap, though, generally. I'm trying to see where they kind of draw their lines. I think of them in the end as being pushovers.
Pushovers for who, though? For Trump?
Yeah.
Yeah.
They don't want to...
Because they're vulnerable both ways.
Yeah, and they just, I don't know. They're not willing to put it all on the line quite like Chip Roy and the Freedom Caucus are, who don't mind if you actually stop the bill from passing for another month or so while you negotiate further. But how they respond to potential Medicaid cuts, they're being a little mealy-mouthed right now about it. On the conservative side, I'm wondering how they are able to bend in the end here, because people like Chip Roy or House conservatives, I think they're pretty honest people. They see this as kind of the last best chance they have to get federal spending under control. That is more important to them than renewing tax cuts. So they're kind of on a holy war right now. But I don't see how they end up not getting rolled here, because they're going to pass a bill with a lot of cuts in the House. The Senate's going to say, yeah, no, we're not doing that. They're going to come to some arrangement that is not going to satisfy Chip Roy and everyone. So what are they going to do? Are they actually going to stop Trump's legislative agenda from passing? I don't think so. So there's a lot of people who you kind of have to save face for here in the end. And it's going to be very naughty.
Huh. We're seeing people like Bernie Sanders and AOC try to take the fight over this bill to vulnerable members' districts. They're having big rallies. They did try that billboard campaign of trying to get people to phone their representatives and tell them how they felt about stuff like Medicaid cuts. Is any of that stuff breaking through to GOP members? I know that the GOP basically was like, okay, well, we're just not going to do town halls anymore. But are they feeling that at all? Or will they?
Yeah, I think they certainly are. If you look at the amount of secrecy and spin and careful language, especially as they're talking around Medicaid cuts, they know this is going to be a mess. They know this is extreme political liability. So I think all of that's working. I mean, it's, Democrats knew as soon as Republicans won, they knew what their slogan would be legislatively, which is Republicans are going to make cuts on programs for the poor to give tax cuts to the rich. And I'm a little I thought maybe Republicans would just adjust their approach maybe a hair to avoid that very obvious trap, but they're not. I mean, they're locked in here. There was some talk a couple of weeks ago about how maybe they might raise taxes for the highest income bracket in this bill.
Yeah, that's like the Steve Bannon preferred approach, I think.
Yeah, and I think there was some talk of it in the White House, but it appears to be pretty dead for now. I think probably some donors got on the phone. But, that would have neutralized half of that talking point that Democrats are going to take to the midterms. So, yeah, I think they're absolutely feeling the pressure about this. And that's why they're saying, we're not cutting anyone for Medicaid. That'd be the states who do that. Or we're just going after waste, fraud, and abuse. And then having a very expansive definition of who that would encompass. So, yeah, they're in a hot spot right now.
So I think what you're saying is it's going to be a long, hot summer in Congress.
Yeah.
Jim Newell, I'm grateful for you. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Jim Newell is a senior politics writer here at Slate. And that's our show. What Next is produced by Paige Osburn, Elena Schwartz, Rob Gunther, Madeline Ducharme, and Anna Phillips. Ethan Oberman and Isabel Angell are giving us a hand too. Ben Richmond is the senior director of podcast operations here at Slate. And I'm Mary Harris. Go track me down on Blue Sky if you'd like. I'm at Mary Harris. Thanks for listening. Catch you back here next time.